Hello, and welcome to Hardware Cleanup, where your aim is to get through all 4 levels and destroy all the viruses. The game is set within a computer, where you're meant to get through the levels and clean all the viruses from it. These viruses are in the shape of a pyramid, a cube, and a rectangle, each with varying amounts of health and a higher difficulty to kill. Once you get through a level, the next one will start. These levels are in the design of 2 very distinct environments, a sci-fi environment and a medieval environment. These are meant to be because they're meant to be like games within your computer that have been seeping into the hardware due to the viruses. So it has been taking the image of those games, whereas the enemies are the viruses, and therefore are these red enemies that just don't belong anywhere. Once you've killed all the enemies, you'll be able to progress. You can also pick up the keys to get through the sections, so you can go and kill the rest of the enemies for the last parts of the game. Once you get through the first level, you'll get to the next. This will go on till the 4th level, where you must kill the boss and end the game.
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm one of the designers and the note taker for our group, meaning I was in charge of noting down everything that was discussed in the group meetings throughout the project. I initially started by working with the full group to decide on what game we'd be creating and the themes behind it. Once we'd finalised an idea, I worked closely with Matt on creating the brief for the project. Following from this, I started my initial grey boxing for the levels that I'd be creating. For my project, I'd be creating 2 sci-fi themed levels as we decided that the game would be split into 2 different genres to fit the story for it. Once I created the basic grey boxes, I worked closely with the artist to decide on what sort of assets would be required for the game. I also worked with the programmers regarding how the player would be able to move between the levels and how I'd need to design them to accommodate certain features for progression throughout them. Once the assets had been completed by the artist, I began implementing them into the levels that I'd created. When implementing the models, I ran into a few issues that stunted progression, but managed to fix the issues that were caused by the normals when importing them. At the end of the project, I'd successfully finished creating 2 levels for the game.
I was one of the game designers and I worked with the group to come up with our own game idea by bouncing ideas back and forth until we agreed on a solid idea. Then, with these ideas, I used them to work alongside the other designer to create our brief for the game. This then gave us ideas on how we could go about designing the game, where me and one artist could go off and create the medieval theme, while the other designer and artist would then go off and create the sci-fi theme. This would link to the theme of the game, of which is based upon corrupting files and viruses, due to the game not looking like a specific theme but a mixture of the two due to the corruption. With the brief and the past ideas in mind, I created some experiment designs to present my ideas for the medieval levels to the group to get some feedback on the designs that I made. This would give me an understanding on what to make for the final designs. For the final level design, I then designed 2 grey box levels and added the layouts for assets. I did this by using inspiration from past experiments and feedback from the group, resulting in me creating 2 small medieval village designs. By adding the layouts for the assets in a grey box form, this made it easier to add the finished models from the artists when I got given them. To finish off both of the levels, I added some ground coverage and the final models in to make them fit with the theme and look more realistic overall.
At the start of this project, I was selected to be Scrub Master, which led to me knowing what everyone did in the previous week and relaying it back to the tutors that were overseeing this project. After the first session had ended, we came up with several ideas, one of them which we based our game on, a hardware cleanup, where I was in charge of making the sci fi assets for half the game, including the character. We could use Mixamo for this project, so I had started making the mesh and the skeleton and everything, and then I had to scrap the skeleton because we were told we can just export animations from Mixamo, which would speed up the process.
Hello, my name is Caleb, and I was one of the main programmers working on the game. My tasks involved creating the player and all of its actions, such as shooting, its camera movement, and its basic movement, which was run off the basic Unreal code. However, we took away its jumping to add less confusion. I was also tasked with creating another bullet type, so I created an explosive bullet that you could shoot and it would expand on impact. Next, I was tasked with the enemies, which run off the same code, however they have varying amounts of health. I was also tasked with buffs. These involved a healing item that would heal by 25, a defense buff, which would mean so you took less damage, a damage buff so you did more damage, a speed buff so you got faster, and an extra life, which would mean you would heal to 50 health upon death. I was also tasked with making the VFX for all of my little orbs and all of the bullets. The bullets were not too different as it was run off the same Niagara, which was for a first for me because I had never used Niagara. I was also tasked with making the main menu, which runs off of 3 buttons that allows you then to go onto the level select, start the game, or exit. The level select runs off of 4 buttons and just lets you pick the level.
Hello there, my name is Riley Manning and I am one of the artists working on hardware cleanup. I was responsible for creating the enemy assets as well as half of the environmental assets. All of these you can see here were used as just to scatter around as decoration, including these bushes, this crystal, these rocks, barrels, boxes, lampposts. Well, these assets here, the well, the house, and this is a market stall used to populate what we tried to create a medieval town. This gate was used to lock level progression and would slide down once the level is completed. These trees would just serve the same purpose as these, but were not used as much because they're obviously much larger assets. These are the enemy sprites, starting with the ranged enemy. This has this one constantly spinning part, which I was dead set on including because I wanted all the different enemies to have other moving parts while they were moving around. And obviously this part would rotate to face the player, which the program has implemented. This is used as a reference point for where its bullets come out of. This is a regular kind of tanky enemy, which requires a few hits to kill, as this constantly rotating part, and would just simply move around trying to collide with the player. This here was originally created as a fun little, not quite serious idea. His name is Philip. He's got a more basic version here. It was intended to be either a boss or a basic grunt enemy, but sadly, when exporting him, his armature broke, so he couldn't be properly implemented because I couldn't find a fix in time. So instead, we've got him as a still statue in one of the sci-fi areas as a little homage to this quite funny idea we had one afternoon.
I'm the secondary programmer for hardware cleanup. I was in charge of putting the game together from the levels and mechanics, and I was the one who finalized the game. I made sure that the game looked and felt fun and playable by implementing the character and enemy animations, screen shakes, designing the UI and miscellaneous animations, as well as some VFX. I also created the level progression mechanics like the key system, enemy sprite barriers and crystals to give them some obstacle and challenge. I was also the level designer, which meant I had to come up with unique obstacles for each level, and made the level progression mechanics modular, so they were editable on each level. I also did the lighting for each level, as well as the game over screen, level transitions, and the objective UI mechanics, and all the mechanics for the HUD on the screen. I took some time adjusting the enemy and player health and damage, and making sure to test after every change, and polishing everything including the map and the menu screen. I did some research on YouTube about game juicing to have an idea on what I could do to improve the game's overall experience.